Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Gary Sirak has 3 Ps that will keep you young. Let's hear what he has to say. Gary, thanks for being with us today.
Bill, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Now, you've written a book, How to Retire and Not Die, which I love that title. I think that's got to be one of my favorite of all time. And we're going to look to you for some advice today. And you say that a successful and happy retirement isn't one size fits all. Well, gee, the commercials on TV show that man walking on the beach with a youngish-looking wife, and he's got a check in his hand, and he's so happy. Tell us why not.
Yeah, that's pretty much not the real world, Bill.
Oh, you shocked me. I'm shocked. You see, I'm coughing. I'm upset.
I can feel my heart flutter. Anyway, no, it's amazing how they paint that picture. But the real retirement is you wake up on a day that you normally go to work and you say, okay, what am I going to do today? And then you find out you have 6 more after that day, and you have a lot of time to fill. And that's not walking on the beach with, the young woman and the check and the martini.
In keeping with that, you say retiring produces a huge windfall of time. We would prefer it's money, but it's a huge windfall of time. But you say this is a resource we may not be the best at managing. Is that what really is the problem? I mean, we have this wonderful resource. All our life we've been working to relax and get up later and have the full day ahead of us and not have to go to a meeting or a conference or get on trains or switch subways. But now we have all this time. Is that where we're having problems?
Oh, it's a huge factor. In fact, it's probably the most important factor is how do you fill your time? And what really happens is we've been scheduled our whole lives, Bill. I mean, I think about when I was in grade school, I was there at the right time. I left when they told me to go home. The bell rang. High school, college, you have classes, then you go to work and you have a schedule at work. And then all of a sudden your whole life, you've been under a schedule and you wake up and you don't have a schedule. And that is a very disturbing fact for most people who are entering retirement. And that's, I think, a huge problem.
That I'm writing that down. That's a great point because as I'm thinking of it, yes, we think of that as just people in the military, perhaps, that they're on a schedule, get up, do this, do that, do the other, the West Pointer, the Naval Academy. But when our lives, we're pretty much the same way, whether it's taking the kids to school, it may be a little less formal and less right down to the absolute second, but we do have a schedule like that. Is retirement harder for people who truly love their work? Let's say the dedicated teacher, they've been retiring for 35 years and, they're still relatively young. I'm going to say anywhere in that maybe 57 to 63 category. And they loved what they did, but things have changed and the school is trying to get them out and offer them a special package, et cetera. Is it tougher for those kind of people?
Yeah, it really is. Unless I have a saying, if you retire from something, that's a problem. If you retire to something, that's not a problem. And what I find is most of the people you describe, Bill, are retiring from because they're being pushed out. They don't have any clue what the to is. And that's going to cause them some serious stress. And that's bad. That's really the point of the book, to be quite frank with you. I wrote the book because I had clients that were not prepared and bad things happened. They didn't have anything to do, so they got sick. I mean, it sounds weird, but it's pretty true. And the next thing you know, they're going to see doctors and they end up, I got tired of visiting people in funeral homes. They weren't talking much there. So it was a real problem. And it spurred me on to why I really got behind this book and decided to make it a passion of mine.
I got that joke in there, too, at the beginning, visiting the people who were quiet at the funeral homes. Now,
well, thank you.
Your clients.
Once in a while, I throw one of those.
I see that, but I want you to know I'm sharp. I'm listening to everything you say, and I'm taking notes. So I'll come back later to see what my score is on the quiz. The people who come to see you, when do you? What are usually their age groups? Let's say police, they can retire, I think, in their 40s. Teachers might be in the mid to late 50s, and the rest of us kind of look toward the kind of early 60s or maybe a little later. When do your clients come to see you?
Actually, it's a smorgasbord. I have people that are coming at 45. I have people coming all the way up to 65 who are saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to retire next year. And then they show me what they're doing, and I'm thinking, yeah, you're really not going to. I'm pretty good at math, and the math doesn't work, so you need to kind of keep working. But it's actually quite a wide variety. I have a gentleman that finally came to see me. He's retiring at 72. And Bill, I mean, I've never met anyone more ill prepared for retirement. Financially, he's great, but clueless what he wants to do for the rest of his life. He was a practicing attorney, and he was bought out, and his contract ends, and he has no idea what's next. And we've had some real serious what's next conversations.
And I would imagine, you can tell me if this is true, but this is going to have a major effect on someone's health as they go into retirement. That if they don't know where they're going, like us on a trip, if we just get in the car, it might be fun for the first few blocks. But are we going north, south? Are we going to wind up in Disney World or Canada? Where are we going?
I believe you hit it right on the head, Bill. You got to have, that goes back to the plan. You got to have a plan. And I use purpose as what you do for other people, passion, what you do for yourself. And the plan is that you can have all the purpose and passion in the world, but if you don't have a plan to implement those, you're in a world of hurt. And that's really why the plan is so critical. And that's what you're talking about. You get in that car and start to drive, you better have a plan where you're going, or you're going to run out of money because you're buying gas going in circles.
And that's the 3 Ps, if I'm correct. When we introduced you today, we talked about the passion, the purpose, and the plan. And that's what you do for people, set them up and kind of get them on the right road, as well as financially, but maybe more what they're going to enjoy to get the most out of their retirement.
Absolutely. Bill, here's something that I just kind of smile. People come to see me and they always want to talk about money. And I say, that's great. We'll talk about money because everybody's worried about that. And that doesn't take very long because it really is just math. You add up what they've got, you add up what's coming in. And if they need more than they have, then they got to keep working. And if they don't, then they're okay to retire. And I mean, I don't want to make it that simple, but in some ways it really is that simple. The real tough part is what do you do with the rest of your time and how do you figure that out? And that's probably 90% of retirement. 10% is maybe money, and the rest of it's, okay, I have this life to lead. What am I planning on doing it? Am I going to go live with my grandchildren? The answer is that's a really bad idea, mostly. So no, you don't want to do that. And it's fascinating the things people come up with that don't work.
Once again, I got that. How people have to listen to you very carefully because you drop those one-liners in very kind of quietly and peacefully, and if you don't watch closely, you miss them. Gary, when you say the retirement is a marathon, not a sprint, can you interpret that for us? What does that really mean?
Yeah, I thought about that a long time. And when I wrote that line, and my son and I wrote the book together, and he never liked the line. And then after I explained it to him, he says, oh, I really like that. I said, good. And he had a vote in it. But the idea of a sprint is you run 100 yards and you're fine. A marathon is all of a sudden you get to be 65 and you got 26 years left to live, at least actuarially. And if you're married in a good marriage, there's a really good chance you're going to be here 26 years later. That's a marathon in my point. 26 miles and change. I think it's 26.2 or something. That's where I came up with the marathon. And my clients actually, when I started studying this and paying attention, I couldn't believe how many made it to 26. So that's how I ended up on that.
Now, you say there are unseen benefits from retirement. What are some of those that we wouldn't think of at first? I mean, I guess we all of a sudden want that free time. Oh, I can do what I want when I want, and whatever we enjoy, maybe fishing or golf, that seems like it's going to be perfect. But I think also, if I'm right, after about 4 to 6 or 8 weeks, most of us kind of tire of that. I mean, it's fun for a while. We see our friends, but, what is it we really need to get out of retirement?
Well, the social side of retirement is huge. So what work brings for us, and, it brings us money and it brings us a place to go and puts us on a schedule. But it also brings communication and some sort of community. And I think when you lack that, it really comes up big as a very strong negative to retirement. Now, if you have a good sense of how you're going to do this, you create your other groups, you create those communities. And, it could be a golf league, it could be a book club, it could be a fishing group. It doesn't matter what it is. I have a group of guys that go out and sample bourbon. I mean, that's that's what they do. And they really make a big deal out of it. I'm going to a book club in a couple of weeks and I'm going to be the speaker at the book club. It's just how creative can you be? Another client of mine brought a bunch of people together to start painting. None of these people have a clue how to paint, so they hired a teacher, and the next thing you know, she's teaching a bunch of guys who have never picked up paintbrush in their life how to paint. It's very interesting, but the community is so big that communication, I think, makes all the difference, Bill.
Gary, before we go further, I'd like to let our audience know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Gary Sirak. He is the author of How to Retire and Not Die. And Gary, we're going to ask you if you tell us the website where we can learn more about this.
GarySirak.com.
Easy enough to remember. We'll ask you that again. And I want our audience to remember the title of that book, How to Retire and Not Die. I just love that. Gary, are some people, did you ever have a client where you actually said to them, maybe you're better off working? Every once in a while we see someone in the news and they're working in the courts till age 84, or they've been in this hospital till age 78 or 77. And they're still working and they're actually a vital part. They're not just hanging on. They're important to what they do.
I think there's a fairly good percentage of people who I've spent time with that I think should never really quit working. Part of it is because they're so passionate and love what they do. The other part of it is they haven't planned out the other side so well. And I think as long as they're in their world, they're going to be just fine. If they get out of their world, I'm not quite so convinced. And so we've talked about, how to create hobbies and how to do things and ways to really build that kind of protection for themselves when they do really retire. My favorite story, Bill, I had a gentleman who retired from an auto parts distributorship that he owned at 65. And he was a very good friend of my father. He joined us and he was still with us at age 92. And he would come in the morning, he would wear his coat and tie, and I think he spent a lot of time playing solitaire, but he was a wonderful person to have around. He was wicked smart. He always had an opinion about everything, some of them good. And we had a great time with him, but he had so much wisdom. I used to call him an encyclopedia, and he'd say, "What do you mean?" I said, you have so much in your brain, Mel. You're a wonderful person to be around, and I dearly appreciated it. So I love the fact that some people just shouldn't really retire. They don't have anything at home that makes it that exciting to do. So I think retirement is maybe not perfect for them.
Gary, you say in your book that our work determines how we see the world. Can you amplify that a little bit and explain how that would affect us into retirement?
Yeah, I mean, there are people that are working in a job that just really dislike their job. And those people are not particularly happy people, to say the least. So when you go to work every day and you're kind of miserable, you kind of have a pretty negative outlook on the world. The other side of the point is there's a lot of people that really do enjoy what they do, and they don't have that same attitude. And it's kind of fascinating when I see both sides. And believe me, I've seen both sides where people are just so miserable. They'll come into my office and say, "Okay, I'm done. I'm going to retire. I don't care what the money is. I need to get out of this job. I really hate what I'm doing." And I said, "Well, if you hate what you're doing, that's a really lousy way to wake up every morning and go to work." So I help them get to that point. And then I say, "Okay, now let's find something you like to do." And Bill, that's where this becomes real interesting, because I'll go back and say, "Okay, you're going to do something else. You're 60 years old. You have, 7 years left to work. Let's find out what you love to do, and let's see if we can figure out how to get you a job in that industry," or whatever that may be. And one of my favorites is I have so many Uber drivers, I can't begin to tell you. These are guys who are executives and they're driving around people, and I just think it's really wild. They miss the communication and the interaction.
I was going to ask you if you ever help people actually find a job, which sounds funny, find a job in retirement, but more for the socialization, the interest, and maybe getting that passion in there again. I think you mentioned someone who was an artist or maybe a writer that could teach people and just do what they love and trade that knowledge to someone else. And you just answered it there. That's part of what you do, I guess.
It is. And again, I don't charge fees for any of this stuff. This is just me kind of giving back to the world, Bill. I just looked at this and I saw so many situations where I thought, wow, I could help them. And so I offer when it's reasonable, and I don't offer if it's not. And people sometimes take my advice and they want it, and sometimes they don't. That's all fine. don't take it personal. But I probably have gotten, 15, 20 people jobs or got them in directions to go the right way. And, it's kind of very rewarding, actually.
In a way, you probably added years to their life, too, because I'm thinking a happy person, if they're doing, and you mentioned that gentleman who just wanted to be an Uber driver and he had his career and now he's either enjoying talking to people or maybe he liked driving and he was stuck in an office or taking the train or subway. And that's a great opportunity for people, especially as they get older. And now they have a connector with people, whatever the job they're doing. They're part of a fraternity or a sorority, so to speak.
Exactly. And this guy had it figured out. He'd go every morning to a bagel shop, Einstein's Bagels, and he'd wait there because it was close to the airport, and he'd have his coffee, his bagel. He'd read the paper. He still does that. He'd get a call, and he'd look and say, am I done with my bagel? He kind of hems it on. Then he goes, picks them up, takes them wherever, and then he goes somewhere for lunch, does the same thing. I'm sure he doesn't make any money, but he does fill his day, and he seems really happy.
Now, we talked about it before the show. In your book, you have a story about a person named Diane. And I think she was a master salesperson, if I recall. So I'd ask you to tell us that story.
Yeah, Diane was a superstar salesperson. Diane thrived. She was such a high numbers producer. She was the strongest salesperson in her company by light years. And she decided, God knows why, to retire. And she was so lost because her whole identity, her whole world revolved around her ability to communicate. She had all these friends that she'd sold to, and all of a sudden she's not there anymore. And she was just totally lost. And we had a number of conversations, and I felt really terrible for her because she was struggling so much that she had given up her identity, which was as this master, incredibly bright salesperson who, by the way, made a lot of money. She had no money worries. She just had the whole mental side of, man, what did I just do? Why did I do this? And a lot of regrets, which we finally got through. But it was that was a hard one, Bill, to be candid with you. I've had lots of people that I've worked with, and she was particularly difficult because she was so wired into her life.
And I would think that's both good and bad. You're very good at what you do. You're the master surgeon. You're the excellent detective. But once you lose that, that is your identity. People look to you and they think a detective at finding out things or solving a crime, the salesperson at convincing people or something, or the lawyer in court. It must be very difficult for them. The better they are, it's a drop down to go into something else. Are you seeing that?
Oh, totally. And they've always been held up on this pedestal, and all of a sudden the pedestal is like the ground floor. And they are, they're used to being treated one way, and all of a sudden they're just, like everybody else, like you and me. So they're not held up in such as high esteem before. It's really a bit earth-shattering to them, and they have to make that adjustment. I'll give you a great example. One of my very good friends was a surgeon, and he was practicing all the way to age 72. And we're in a golf cart one day, and I said, Mesh, and I said, how are you doing? He said, Gary said, I think I'm finally over it. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I know I've been talking to you about retirement, but I really am done. I said, okay. And he said, but here's my problem. I don't have any hobbies. I have nothing. What do I do? So we sat down and we worked out a schedule, and he actually joined this group of guys called the Geezers, appropriately named, Bill. And they will go out and they have geezer golf. They meet twice a week and play geezer golf. In the winter, they go bowling. They go to lunches. They go to baseball games. And all of a sudden, this gentleman who's a really wonderful person, who never really had a lot of friends, now has like 20 friends who actually communicate with him. He said, I have a social life for the first time in my life. He said, I only knew doctors. Now I know like real people. He said, I think I like them better.
I love that term, geezer golf. I don't know if you have copyrighted it but I can see T-shirts with that and your picture in the corner. And I think that might be something seriously you want to look into, because I just jotted it down. I think that's a perfect term for golf. And I would say probably at least 50% of the golfers that I know, at least, and I see on the courses, they would fall into and qualify for geezer golf. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think so too. I know I do. And when I play with them, they're always amazed because I don't see very well. And they're always saying, how's the guy that can't see beat me? And I said, well, kind of because you suck. But anyway, that's the truth. So anyhow, fun stuff, though. We have a very good time, Bill.
Gary, before we go further, again, I want our audience to know you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Gary Sirak. He is the author of How to Retire and Not Die. Gary, would you tell us the website?
GarySirak.com.
And just spell your last name, please.
S as in Sam, Irak.
And again, we'll ask you that later on. And to our audience, if a lot of this is hitting home, maybe for your dad, your uncle, your neighbor, you can go and listen to a podcast of this show or recommend it to these people. They can go to nccradio.org. That's nccradio.org. Go to Secrets of Success and just look for How to Retire and Not Die. It's free. There's no charge. And they can listen to this show at their convenience. I saw a term in your book called limbic regulation. And I don't know if I'm catching you off balance. If I am, just tell me. But it kind of was brought out by your previous story. Can you tell us what that is and why is it so important in retirement?
Limbic balance. So basically, you have to have a balance in your life. And I wrote this 3 years ago, so I'm trying to think exactly what I do with limbic balance.
Well, what you say, I'll make it easy. In the book, you said the brains and the nervous system like to be around others. And I'm thinking of that geezer golf with that, because who do golfers like to be around? Other golfers. And they're the same age and they're probably having a ball. So
the whole thing is figuring out who it is that you want to hang out with, what you want to do, what you like. I have a guy that's into gardening. And so he's a loner, and that man can spend time in his garden. He doesn't really need other people. He's just really happy doing that. He's pretty rare. Most of the people I know need social action. Now, I will say this guy was in a really big time social environment. He was always on stage, always being in front of people. And for the first time in his life, he doesn't have to perform or do anything. He can just be himself. And he's really thrilled. And so I think that's a big deal. I think people sometimes want to stay in the environment they're in, but there's another group that says, I want to be in something else because I've done that my whole life and I'm tired of it. So it's figuring out what's right for you and how it makes sense. I had a lady that was an all-night nurse at a hospital. And she finally retired, and she was totally miserable. And she ended up going to work at a kind of a private club, and she would clean the club in midnights. And there was just a sign. She was there for dinner with some friends, and she saw the sign, help wanted. And the one friend said, you got to take that job. It's an all-night job. And she said, really? There's a job like that? So she is now cleaning that restaurant. Loves it. She puts music on and does her thing. And it's her life. She's always been up all night and sleeps during the day. And I've never seen her happier. And she's not taking care of patients in hospitals, which she seems much happier with too.
You know, it's interesting hearing you say this, because just by you telling us some of these stories, I think you're giving a lot of our listeners permission and saying, wait a minute, that's me. That sounds like my aunt, my uncle, my mom, my dad. And it's telling us we're allowed to do this. There's nothing bad about going from nursing to working in a country club and doing the night shift. If that's what you enjoy and you're getting obviously an income from it and social approval, you're enjoying all aspects. So why not do it, right?
Oh, totally. And the other thing cool is she said, Gary, I've cut my food budget down almost nothing because I go in and I eat dinner there. And she said, and that's part of the perks. And I said, well, that works. So she goes into the back and eats her dinner and then goes and does her thing. And so they're happy. She's thrilled. And she cut her food budget in half.
Now, another term we talked about before the show, and I love this, and maybe this is going to be your next book, but you have a story about a gentleman named Martin. And I think Martin had something called a work funeral, and you're laughing, so I know you remember it. Can you tell our audience about Martin and what is a work funeral?
Well, Martin was a very successful man in the unions, and he was awarded many, many things. Well, Martin retired, and they had almost kind of a forced retirement thing, Bill. I mean, they kind of pushed him out at a certain age, which he was okay with. But what happened was he retired, and he realized that there was just something missing. He was just depressed. And he and I talked about it one time, and we had coffee one day, and he was telling me, and I thought, wow, that's really strange. And I kind of told him about that book, Tidying Up, which was out a number of years ago. And we had a conversation about that. And he said, well, that's interesting. Anyway, what he ended up doing is he invited a whole bunch of friends over. He's got a really nice property, and they built a big bonfire. And then he kind of disappeared, Bill. And they were all roasting their hot dogs and their, s'mores and all that stuff they're doing. And there's loud music playing. And all of a sudden music stops. And Bill comes down with a wheelbarrow and everything he ever got from work, every trophy, every plaque, every shirt, anything that had work on it, he brought it down in that wheelbarrow. And he ceremoniously burned every single piece.
And just that was the end of it for him, right? I mean, pictures, trophies, you said everything went at that one time.
Everything. And when it was over, and I saw him after, unfortunately, I wasn't invited, which I was really bummed. I would love to have gotten pictures. But I wasn't invited, and I blame him for that. But nonetheless, I talked to him right after that, and I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "Gary," said, "I have not felt this good in probably 35 years." He said, "It was so amazing." He said, "I woke up the next morning," and he said, "It's the best I've felt." He said, "I got rid of all this stuff, and I realized every time I looked at it, it brought back things and memories and things I really don't want to deal with anymore. I'm done with that. And it allowed me to clear my plate and go on with my life." And I will tell you, I've seen him a lot of times, and he is so happy. And he's doing different things, and he bikes and he golfs and he hikes and does all kinds of stuff. And he's like a different guy.
Now, I saw another term in your book, and I had never heard this one, a retirement mentor. Is that what you are? Would you consider yourself a retirement mentor, or is that something totally different?
No, I guess I think I might be one of those, Bill. I looked at people. How I came up with that is I was very young in my career, and I went to this place to eat breakfast probably 3 mornings a week. And I sat down at the counter, and on one side of the counter next to me was a man who was 72, is a national sales manager for a very large meat company. And the other guy on the other side was about 50, and he had just retired, sold his company. And the two of them, we talked retirement. Now, I mean, I'm 20 something, maybe 30, and they're telling me about retirement, and I'm listening to both of them. They became retirement mentors for me because I went back to them numerous times. I hit the well and asked them questions. Unfortunately, the older gentleman passed away. The guy that was 50 is still around, and I actually have called him a few times and just had conversations. My father was a mentor. And what a mentor does for you is you look for somebody that's been successful in retirement, and then you ask them how they did it. What did they do? How did they get to this place? Because it's not easy, and it's not simple, and it's sometimes not even logical. And I think those people have figured it out, and I love tapping into their brain and saying, "Okay, what are you doing? How'd you do it?"
Gary,
and what made you come up with that? So.
I love your ideas. And again, that's simple, brief, to the point, and probably free. So it matches all the things we love on this show. Once again, I want our audience to know the book is How to Retire and Not Die by our guest, Gary, Sirak. And give us the website once again.
GarySirak.com.
Gary, thank you for being with us today. We really enjoyed it.
Bill, thanks for having me, and a great pleasure talking to you.
I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.